with regard to this particular question that you have raised, it's interesting that we have a cultural sense that the family is the first line of protection in this country. When you ask people, what can you tell us about your country, they tell you about the ruined cities and our culture, and then they say we have wonderful families. Now, actually, we do have wonderful families, but there are families which are dysfunctional and which are broken down. It is in those families that we try to address through law, programs, etc., interventions to impact on the children. And I'm not going to go into the impact on children because I know Hiranti is going to talk about that area of impact on children. What are the incidents? The incidence of child violence in this country is horrendous in the family. And that is something we need to recognize, and we are often in denial because there's an incidence of now this is all on an evidence base of at least 25 to 30 years. So there's an evidence base. The global partnership is saying strategize on the basis of an evidence base. We have an evidence base of research. We don't need any more research. There's incest in the family. And it's not only there's a sense that this happens only in migrant families. No, there is incest. In fact, the law tried to address that through legal interventions as far back as 1995. We have sexual abuse of girls and boys, and now it is clear from evidence that much of that, the persons who are abusing are people known to the child. So it's a family situation. They're not outsiders, not the community. And most recently, there's a growing incidence of sexual abuse resulting in child prostitution. Because a girl is marginalized in the family, she has no future in the family, she's in fact exploited by the community in prostitution. And this is really very frightening because in the past, the dropout rates for girls in this country was much lower than for boys. And we used to say that boys were engaged in boy prostitution. Now the statistics are indicating that there's a high dropout rate for girls from school. And this is also related to the fact of exploitation in sexual abuse. So these are very serious concerns, and of course there is incidence of physical violence, but interestingly the research is indicating that the incidence of violence is in the schools. And Tara is here. When she was education secretary, introduced this regulation which says you cannot use corporal punishment in schools, but now we are told that it was given in the form of a guideline, and consequently that schools are continuing to use violence. Now when there is violence in the school, we do not know whether it's parallel with physical violence in the home, but it could be because this is seen as a form of evidence, or as a form of discipline. Much of the research is, and parent research is on incidence of violence in the school. I don't know whether we have hard evidence on use of physical corporal punishment in the home. But that is also one of a key factor. Now, to go to possible causes, and I think that's where this is relevant, this initiative. There's been a deep breakdown of values with regard to parental caring, with regard to values of what parents are supposed to do. There's an increasing culture of greed, competitiveness fostered by parents among children. Today's island has an appalling story of a doctor professional who actually got somebody to cheat and get a paper, a question paper, leaked in order to get his son to pass whatever exam. We have an incident of a child's mouth being burnt by the parent because the banks were giving 1 gold sovereign to a child who passed this exam, and the child's mouth was burnt. So there's a lot of greed in families also. That is, I'm not saying in all families, in dysfunctional families, competitiveness. And that is a cause for further violence perpetrated both by parents, internally, relatives, etc. Then again, we have, apart from that, the whole non-recognition of adolescent sexuality. This is a country where most of the schools are co-educational. Boys, girls meet each other, they're teenagers. This country has failed despite all our efforts, and Hiranti knows, I think Tara knows. We have tried to say, use a program in schools to let children know about their bodies, how they need to protect themselves, etc. So in the absence of awareness of girls and boys of responsible sexuality, responsible sexual behavior, girls or boys become targets of abuse and violence in the home because they don't know how to behave in that environment. And then the authoritarianism within certainly the school transmits itself sometimes to a situation where when there are programs for children and they want to go and tell their mother or their father or their school teacher, they are met with resistance. So this idea of your mother or your father being your friend, the person whom you can talk to, seems to have vanished. So there's an authoritarianism in the school, reinforced by a certain authoritarianism in the home, and the combined effect is that a child who is even abused has no one to go to. Now, where do the religious values come in? Once again, we see a breakdown, because I'm a Buddhist, so I don't know about what happens in the Christian and the Muslim faiths. But certainly Buddhist education in the Dhamma schools has been an utter failure. Venerable Sirs, I'm sorry to say this. What you see is children go rote learning without any idea of what the basic and core values of Buddhism are. Not in terms of tolerance, not in terms of generosity. And they just go for rote learning, may be connected with passing the examination in Buddhism at the relevant. So therefore, then the quality of education in the schools, particularly in the Dhamma schools, has to change. It has to change to foster the core values of Buddhism. And we all know that the core values of Buddhism are shared in all the religions of the world, be it Christianity, be it Islam, be it Hinduism. In fact, I read recently of the Bhagavad Gita, and when I read it, I suddenly realized that all the existential analysis of Buddhism with regard to life is reflected in the Gita also. So there's a connectivity. So then where are these values? The values are a rich resource of our different faiths. But we have moved away from the inspirational resources of those religions to formalizing ritualism, and consequently we have left our children bereft. So therefore, this is an opportunity for the venerable clergy to also take stock and see what can we do to impact on the quality of religion, what can we do to impact on the quality of the transmission of religious values in the home, and where do we start? Thank you.